We'll begin in just a few moments. We're still waiting for a few more to enter into our sanctuary. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. Cantor. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are gathering tonight, certainly under the heavy weight of recent events and the horrific terrorist attack that shattered countless lives and left us all reeling. In times like these, the value and power of community cannot be overstated. It's a time for grieving, for reflection, but also for unity and for strength. And we're honored to have special guests among us tonight who embody the very essence of resilience and community. We welcome Professor Dean Bell, the president of Spertus Institute, who will be sharing his thoughts on Jewish resilience. And Professor Bell is our scholar in residence this weekend for the program that was endowed to us by Norman and Ethel Gill, who had the vision and commitment to enhance Jewish educational opportunities for us all. And their foresight feels profoundly necessary at a moment like this. And it's also particularly meaningful that their memory is stewarded in such a special way by Eileen and Howard Dubner and the entire Dubner family, who keeps the Gill legacy shining brightly. I also want to extend a warm welcome to Pastor Nicole from North Shore Presbyterian Church, with whom our congregation celebrates Thanksgiving, and members of her congregation. And we've been coming together for around 7 decades to celebrate Thanksgiving together. And your presence here tonight, Pastor, sends a powerful message of unity, strength, and shared sorrow, one that resonates deeply with us all. And while Shabbat can be a respite from the storms of life, we also can't be indifferent to the world outside our doors. It's for this reason that every Jewish sanctuary must have a window. And right now, outside our windows, there's great pain and suffering, sadness, fear, and anger. And I think inside our sanctuary as well. We think of our family in Israel and those we love. So let our music and our hearts reflect the honest truth that we are pained, but we are together. My friend Rabbi Craig Lewis shared this idea earlier today from Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's Introduction to the Case for Jewish Peoplehood. And the late Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik of blessed memory wrote, "If boiling water is poured on the head of a Moroccan Jew, the prim and proper Jew in Paris and London must scream. And by feeling the pain, that person is loyal to his people. Perhaps we can extend that to all humanity. And music often expresses what words cannot, and we hope that these selections will offer another layer of comfort and understanding to us all. And our first song that we're going to sing is Al Kol Eleh, our first song, a song that encapsulates the pain, the hope, and the resilience that we're gathering to discuss and embody in this service. So let us come together this evening to find solace, to find strength, and to reaffirm our faith and resilience even in the face of unimaginable loss and horror. Our tradition teaches us that even in the darkest times, there's a light that never goes out, the light of community, of faith, and of hope. And thank you for being that light for each other tonight. We join together in the singing of Al Kol Eleh. The English words are on the screen, and then we will turn to the Hebrew words.
For the honey and the bee sting, for the bitter and the sweet, all the things we join as one to make our lives complete. For the future of our children, for our prayers will never cease, for the hope that with tomorrow comes a world of peace. Al Kol Eileh, Al Kol Eileh, Shmor Ali Eli HaTov, Al Hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, Al Hamav ve'hamatov, Al Nata Kol Natua, Al Tishkach et HaTikva, Hashiveni v'nashuva al ha'aretz ha'tova.
It's a rare thing to be able to gather inspiration from CNN. But there was a rabbi this morning, a representative of the Israel Defense Forces, who was talking about the lighting of Shabbat candles. And he shared that in his home, that not only did he light the Shabbat candles, but he lit extra candles, a pair for each member of his home, his children as well, his wife and his children. And he established that for all of these families, it's a reminder that each individual, each human being brings light into the world. And each candle represents their soulful qualities. In the darkness of the night, we need light. And for those families who are missing dear ones, in a sense, there is added darkness into their world, into ours. But light is a special thing. And even though the physical presence of loved ones may be gone, we can still feel their presence and we can still feel their light. And sometimes there is light that shines through us, that lights the world around us for friends and family and community. And I know that the memory of the Gills is present with us tonight, because not only does it shine through moments like these where we learn together and study together and grow together as a community, but it shines through those whom they loved and the generations that follow. And so it's a meaningful tradition to invite Eileen Dubner and Emma and Lauren to step forward as they have the honor of kindling our Sabbath candles. We read responsively.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us.
As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We sing together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
May this Shabbat be one of kindling light even amidst the darkness. Thank you so much.
May this Shabbat be one of reflection. Let us hold our sorrows dear while we lay down our worries, if only for a moment. Grant us fortitude of mind and of spirit, resilience in the face of enmity, clarity amidst the chaos. Show us the way toward community, unveil our eyes as we embrace one another. We'll continue with Shalom Alechem, which can be found on page 24.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Barechuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Tzedchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh, Baruch Hu.
We continue with Chatzi Kaddish on page 26.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon, uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael, ba'agala, uv'izman kari v'imeru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'alam le'olmei almaya, Yitbarach Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei dekudeshah. Brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma, v'yimeru. Amen.
We rise for the call to worship the Baruch Hu, which can be found on page 28.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
We turn to Ma'ariv Aravim on page 30. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bidvaro Ma'ariv Aravim Bechokma Poteach Sha'arim Uvitvuna Meshane Itim Umachalif et Hazmanim Umsader et HaKochavim B'mishmerotehem Barakia Kirtzono Borei Yom V'Laila Golel Or Mipnei Choshech V'Choshech Mipnei Or Uma'avir Yom Umevi Laila, Umavdil Ben Yom Uvein Laila, Adonai Tzebaot Shemo. El Chai V'Kayam Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Ata Adonai, HaMa'ariv Aravim. We read together, Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Baruch Ata Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. We turn to the watchword of our faith, the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
You may be seated. We read together for Ve'ahavta, love your God with every heartbeat, with every breath, with every conscious act. Keep in mind the words I command you today. Teach them to your children. Talk about them at work, whether you are tired or you are rested. Let them guide the work of your hands. Keep them in the forefront of your vision. Do not leave them at the doorway of your house or outside your gate. They are reminders to do all of my mitzvot, so that you can be holy for God. I am Adonai your God. I led you out of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. Before we come to the words of Mi Chamocha, a prayer that our ancestors offered having crossed from slavery and bondage in Egypt to freedom on the other side of the Sea of Reeds, we ask for a prayer. We pray the words of Rabbi Liz P.G. Hirsch, the executive director of the Women for Reform Judaism, a prayer for the captive women and children. Our God, the God of our ancestors, free all those captured in war. Free the captive women. Free our mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, and aunts. Free the babies and children, senselessly, violently kidnapped. Fulfill that great mitzvah, that holy duty of redeeming the captive. May they all return swiftly to their families and their homes. May women's bodies be sacred and safe. Shekhinah, nurturing presence, watch over them, guard them, protect them, bring them home. Brucha at Adonai, matira asurot. Blessed are you, eternal our God, who frees the captive. We continue with Mi Chamocha.
Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha neda bakodesh. Nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele. Malechutecha ra'u vanecha, בוקי הים, לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Hashkivenu, a prayer traditionally recited at nighttime when our ancestors wondered if they would make it through the night. We have our own worries and our own anxieties at this time. We too pray for God to grant us respite underneath God's Sukkot Shalom. Give us a place to rest, Adonai our God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are protection and safety, and in your presence are acceptance and gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace, over all we love, over our Jerusalem and yours. Baruch atah Adonai, hapores Sukkot Shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. We continue with the singing of Vishamru.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש.
Pray as if everything depended upon God and act as if everything depended on you. We rise for the Amidah, the Tefillah. It can be found on page 46 in your prayer books if you're using them.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'imoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'Konei HaKol, Ve'Zocher Chastei Avot ve'Imahot, Umevi geula livnei v'neihem lema'an shemo be'ahava melech ozer u'moshia u'magen Baruch atah Adonai magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah Ata gibor le'olam Adonai, mechayei hakol ata rab lehoshia, mashiv haruach umorid hagashem, mechalkel chaim bechesed, mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, somech noflim verofei cholim, umatir asurim, umekayem emunato lishenei afar, michamolcha ba'al gevurot, umido melach, melech memit, umechaye, umatzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman ata lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, mechaye hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kedoshim bechol yom yehalalu chasela. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
We read responsively, God gave us Shabbat as a special holy day. When we celebrate Shabbat, we make our lives holy. We make our lives holy when we rest. We make our lives holy when we pray. We make our lives holy when we study Torah. We make our lives holy when we share the joy of Shabbat. Thank you, God, for this holy day. Thank you, God, for Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh hashabbat. O God, may we always say and do what is right and good, wherever we live in this country, in the land of Israel, anywhere. May we understand that you are our God. We turn to you in prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha b'yirah na'avod. God of goodness, we give thanks together for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lehodot. We offer this prayer of peace on this evening, this first Shabbat post-attacks, although if you consider last weekend as it began upon Shabbat, but this is really the Shabbat when we're most aware after a difficult week. We pray for peace here and for all in Israel. We read together, "Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Go on beating, and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael, b'shalom." At this time, we offer a prayer of Misha Berach, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, a prayer of healing for body and for soul, a refuah shlema, a complete healing. We think of these dear members of our community who are in need of a Misha Berach at this time: Shandel Bat Frida Malka, Julie Borikoff, Margot Raz, Carol Dubin, Sharon Rotman, Steve Toplinsky, Esther Cohen, Lisa Furstad, Hachazan Sarah Rachel Bat Yocheved Alexander, Steve Plotkin, Avram Ben Naftali, Marilyn Harmon, Mary Frankowitz, Sophia Rubenstein, Ilana Himmelfarb, Avraham Bat Frida, Marla Chakowski, Michael Sychek, David Rotter, Natalie Cohen, Keith Mandel, Jamie Creaman, Ela Batnatan Vishoshana, Mark Cook, Luke Cooper, Jason and Keely Roberts, Dr. Susie Mendelson, Audrey Rubin, Michaela Helen Berg, Michal Stroud, Susan Garrison, Warren Beal, Ron Slavin, Peter Rotter, Fredlin Kruglock Vale, Eileen Shippen, Roger Cook, Michael Bernstein Fine, Neil Pinsky, Michael Keller, Baruch Laser Ben Esther, Layla Rosen, David Kleinman, Batya Riva Bat Yosef Ben Miriam, Rina Leah Bat Malka Sura, Meir Ben Herschel V'Nechama, Pinchas Ben Avraham V'Chaya, Avraham Ben Moish V'Emunah, Al Rossman, Wendy Schuster, Ann Becker, Kathy Baker, Hope Marins, Janet Van Zyl, Ann Katz, Mosi Ramirez, Diane Redman, Mark Ackerman, Ruth Resnick, Sally Stern, Ronald Barmazel, Victor Mechanic, Jeff Zemmel, Eileen Hirsch, Carolyn Newman, Magina Avira, Devora Leah, and Yocheved Sarah Leah. If there are loved ones whom you are thinking of who are in need of refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf, or refuah shlema, I invite you to hold them in your hearts as we sing Misha Berach. You may be seated.
Misha Berach avoteinu mikor habracha le'imotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach imotenu mikor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
With those words of healing echoing in our minds, we take a moment now for Tfilat Halev, the prayers in your heart.
ונפשי כעפר אותי אלוהי נצור לשוני מרע ושפתי מדבר מרמה ואם קל אלי נפשי תדום ונפשי כעפר אותי פתח ושפתי מדבר מרמה ואם קל אלי נפשי תדום ונפשי כעפר אותי אלוהי נצור לשוני מרע ושפתי מדבר מרמה ואם קל אלי נפשי תדום ונפשי כעפר אותי יהיו לרצון אמרי פי והגיון ליבי לפניך אדוני צורי וגואלי.
Thank you to Rabbi Pozlowski and Cantor Perper for that beautiful, and to Paul for that beautiful, beautiful musical meditation. There's a concept that exists within Judaism about prayer, that sometimes prayer is keva, it's fixed. And we have many fixed prayers that we recite each day, prayers that we recite on Shabbat, prayers that we recite on holiday, that follow a fixed order, a fixed pattern, and fixed words. And then there is the concept of kavanah, which talks about the intentionality behind the prayer. And when you sense that really feeling it in your heart, when you feel connected to something greater than yourself, something that's divine. Sometimes our prayers, they're fixed. But there are moments for me, those of you who know about how I feel about flying when I'm on an airplane, I am praying that kavanah unlike any other times. We recite the prayer for the state of Israel often on Shabbat morning here at Congregation Shalom, but we've decided to make this a part of our prayers each and every day when we have minyan and when we gather together on Shabbat evening and Shabbat morning too. Because this is a moment where it isn't simply fixed. It's a moment where we need to feel it. We need to feel connected to not only something greater than ourselves, but we need to feel connected to each other, and we need to feel connected to our family that's in Israel. So I'd like to invite you to read this prayer for the state of Israel first together in Hebrew, and then we will read together in English. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, Hagen Aleha be'avrat chasdecha, Ufros Aleha Sukat Shlomecha, Ushlach Orcha ve'amitcha l'rashecha Zarecha ve'otzecha ve'teknem be'etza Tova milfanecha, V'natata Shalom ba'aretz b'simchat olam le'oshveha v'nomar Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, Bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. And let us say, Amen. It's now a joy to call upon the entire Dubner family. If you would come up and have the honor of opening up our ark doors as we turn to the words of Aleinu. We are going to be skipping over the typical sermon spot. We invite you to stay. We're going to be doing Aleinu, and then we'll be recognizing those who passed into life eternal with the Kaddish prayer that Rabbi Shapiro will lead. And then we will move into the latter part of our evening, where we'll have the privilege and the pleasure of hearing Professor Dean Bell speak to us about Jewish resilience. We rise now as we turn to the sacred words of Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומולדים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Thank you once again to the Dubner family. Please be seated as we turn now to Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. It's a privilege now to call upon Rabbi Shapiro, who's going to lead us through the Kaddish prayer.
Of course, we're going to be reciting Kaddish for our dear ones who have entered into life eternal. But this is an unusual week and a horrific period of time, once again, for the Jewish people. And there is a tradition of reading a prayer prior to reciting the Kaddish, which we have in our prayer books. But rather, tonight, I would like to share with you a poem, particularly in reference for the despair that the Jewish community has often felt, in which we have witnessed the awful week that has passed with the murder of Jewish people by virtue of the fact of their being Jewish, trying to support themselves in a land which they had nurtured and sustained. The poem is written by a Russian, Yevgeny Yevtushenko. Yevtushenko was a Russian-born poet a man with an extraordinarily open mind and a care for others. He wrote this poem in 1933 because he understood the meaning and the horror of having Jews murdered in pogroms instituted by Russians. The murder, the wholesale murder of Jewish people because they happened to be Jewish. So he wrote this poem in 1933. He was born in 1933, and he wrote the poem as late as 1961, in part to protest the Soviet Union's refusal to identify the horrific slaughter of Jews at Babi Yar in Russia, a ravine in the suburbs of Kiev, as a site of the mass murder that day of 33,000 Jewish souls, September 29th through the 30th in 1941. Dmitri Shostakovich's 13th Symphony is based in part on this poem. Once again, it is a poem which asks humanity to come together to create a better world, that no matter what our religion or what our race or our nationality, we are human beings. And if we really are human beings, we live our lives with a sense of respect and admiration for the good soul of every other human being. This is the poem. I'll read parts of it, and then we'll recite Kaddish. No monument stands over Babi Yar, where thousands of Jews suffered. A drop sheer as a crude gravestone. I am afraid. Today I am as old as all the Jewish people. Now I seem myself to be a Jew because I link myself to the Jewish people. Here I plod through ancient Egypt. Here I perish crucified on the cross. And to say this day I bear the scars of nails. I seem to be Dreyfus, or the Philistine is both informer and judge. I'm behind the bars, beset on every side, hounded, spat on, slandered, squealing dainty ladies in flounced Brussels lace stick their parasols into my face. I seem to be a young boy from Bialystok. Blood runs spilling over the floors. The barroom rabble-rousers give off a stench of vodka and onion. A boot kicks me aside, helpless. In vain I plead with these pogrom bullies while they jeer and they shout, "Beat the Yids! Save Russia! Some grain marketer beats up my mother." Oh, my Russian people, I do know you. I do know you. Are international to the core, but those with unclean hands have made a jingle of your purest name, O God. I know the goodness of my land. I know that there's goodness here. How vile, though, the anti-Semites, without a qualm, they pompously called themselves the Union of the Russian people. So I seem to be, because I think of them, I seem to be and frank, transparent as a branch of April, and I love and have no need of phrases above the thousands and thousands of buried. I am each old man, here shot dead. I am every child, here shot dead. Nothing in me shall ever forget the Internationale. Let it thunder. When the last anti-Semite on earth is buried forever, in my blood there is no Jewish blood. In their callous rage, all anti-Semites must hate me now. As I am a Jew, I will declare myself as a Jew. And for that reason, I am a true Russian. We remember with piety and with hope those whose lives were severed this past week because they had in their soul the spirit of the Jewish people, to be able to live life and to love their children. This great lesson, important lesson by a Russian Christian, has taught us the spirit of purity within all humanity. We remember them as we do these individuals within our community. Those who are observing Shiva for Riva Goldstein and Donald Oppenheimer, and those whose Shaloshim are being observed. Marilyn Goldstein Lazier, Carol Weiss, Phoebe Zucker, who are observing their Shaloshim, and those whose yortzites tonight: Erwin Arbichor, Ronald Barmash, Milton Becker, Wendy B. Berman, Florence Burstein, Harold Biller, Minnie Dubman, Benjamin Feen, Richard Feigenbaum, Louis Feingold, Lottie Fleischer-Minkus, Jack Grinbaum, Edith Israel, Calvin Joswick, Samuel Kagan, Lillian Kolb, Fanny Krantz, Leon Leopold, Harvey Levin, Ishmael Levkov, Jack Lichted, Irvin B. London, Sadie Mendeloff, Stacy Naiman, Howard Pillay, Morris Paley, Leo Peter, Leo D. Pinsky, David Rosenthal, Howard Ross, Sam Rothman, Lee Rothman, Shep Schmidt, John M. Schanip, Melvin H. Schnoll, Marion Smith, Goldie Spiegler, Joseph L. Strauss, Samuel Sussman, A. Allen Zverdlin, and memories of dear family members Peter Stickler, Tilly Mendelson, Abe Mendelson, Belle Felk, Ben Felk, Louis Stickler, Albert Stickler, Clara Pieper, Norbert Pieper. Those are the names on our list. Is there anyone here who wants to call out the name of a dear one who has perished, who has lost family? Does anyone here want to call out any of the names of our dear ones? In remembrance of all of our loved ones, in remembrance of those people who have perished, who are innocents, we pray that life can go on with strength and with sweetness, as opposed to bitterness and anger. page 294, we rise in order to join together in the sacred words of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agola uv'izman kariv v'yemru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam ul'olmei olmaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha b'richu, le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'ru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Osei shalom bimramav, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May we live in peace and with dignity.
You may be seated.
In the rising of the sun, we remember. In the blowing of the wind, we remember. In the opening of buds, we remember. We remember. When we're blueness of the sky, we remember. In the rustling of the leaves, we remember. As the year starts and it ends, we remember. We remember. When we're weary and need strength, we remember. When we're lost and sick at heart, we remember. When we've joys we yearn to share, we remember. We remember. So long as we live, they too shall live. They are now a part of us. They are now a part of us. They are now a part of us as we remember. We remember.
It's important for us to always turn from sadness and grief to the light. It's something that we do. To look at the music of Israel, to look at the music and the prayers of our people, they're always bittersweet. We can't forget the sweet. The sweet is important even now. And so, as our tradition teaches us, those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. And it is always a joy to think about the vibrancy of our community and our congregation and all that we do to affirm life and living. And so it's now an honor to call upon our congregational president, Steve Wallace, who is going to share with us in his announcements some of the things that are happening here at Congregation Shalom and in our community, and all those things that speak to life. And through Steve's efforts and the leadership's efforts, we are always pursuing that. And so thank you, Steve, for always bringing us towards the light.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. A mazel tov to the Stickler family on Lila becoming a bat mitzvah tomorrow. And a thank you to Dr. Dean Bell for joining us this weekend, and to the Gill family, to Howard and Eileen Dubner for sponsoring this Norman and Ethel Gill Scholar in Residence weekend. Tomorrow, in addition to Lila's bat mitzvah at 10 a.m., we will have Torah study at 9, led by Dr. Bell, who will be discussing Judaism and the environment from the beginning, understanding nature and human responsibility. Immediately following Torah study will be the 10 o'clock in the morning Shabbat service, and after that service, Dr. Bell will lead a lunchtime study session interrogating tradition as meaning-making, followed by the community lunch. I will be there. Please join me for a wonderful morning of learning. This Sunday, there will be Boker Tov Hebrew and Religious School. Rabbi Pozlowski has a new adult education class, Jewish Views on the Afterlife, meeting on Tuesday evenings, running from October 31st, from 6:30 to 7:30 at night. If you'd like more information on this class, please contact the temple office. On Saturday, October 21st, we have an adult screen-free night at the First and Bowl in Wauwatosa. Watch your e-blasts for details, and please come join us. On Sunday, October 22nd, we have the first of our mental health forums, Fortnights and Snapchats and TikToks, oh my. Each session runs from 10 to 11. Jeremy Chapman, the medical director of child psychiatry at SSM Health Trefford Studios in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, will be here leading a discussion exploring common misconceptions as well as effective ways to leverage your child's interest in screen time activities. There will be 2 additional Sunday forums on November 19th and then on December 17th. Please plan to join us for any or all of them. There will be a youth kickoff event on Sunday, October 22nd for our 1st through 3rd graders and then our 4th through 6th graders. It'll be fun for all with tie-dye and minute-to-win-it games, along with a pizza lunch. So please see your emails from Temple. Sign your children up. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Steve. One other announcement, I don't know whether it made it into the announcements, but on Wednesday at 6:30 for parents of college students, we are also going 6:30 p.m. We're also having the Hillel staff that are coming to our community and our congregation to speak to our parents of our college students about what is happening on campus, to give them the tools and the resources that they and their children might need to confront a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hate. And so also, we are going to now turn to the Kiddush. And the Kiddush traditionally begins with the words, Vayihir vayivoker, right? Yom HaShishi. And there was evening and there was morning, right? It's important to remember that light always follows darkness, right? That there is always, I've never seen a night that didn't have a dawn. And we are waiting for that sunrise to happen for our community, and I, with perfect hope and knowledge, know that it will. And so let's rise together now as we taste the sweetness that comes when we join together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon inchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit. Ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim. Ki vanu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekayim
We are going to turn to our concluding hymn for the Shabbat, and as we turn back to what we sang at the beginning, Al Kol Ele, as we think of not only where we are now, but where we could be tomorrow.
Al kol eile, al kol eile, shmor na li Eli hatov, al hadvash ve'al ha'okes, al hamar ve'hamatok, al natan Natua, al tishkach et ha-tikva, hashiveni v'nashuva el ha'aretz ha'tova.
You may be seated. Tonight, as we gathered in unity and reflection for this special Shabbat service, we're truly honored to have with us a person whose expertise in life resonates with the themes of our gathering, Dr. Dean Bell. Professor Bell is the 9th president and CEO of Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership, where he also holds a faculty appointment as professor of history. His academic journey has spanned esteemed institutions such as DePaul University, Northwestern University, Hebrew Theological College, and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and the University of California, Berkeley. In addition to being a leading voice for the advancements of Jewish higher education, Dr. Bell has been deeply involved with the Midwest Jewish Studies Association and the Association for Jewish Studies. His work is widely published, particularly in the fields of medieval and early modern Jewish history, as well as early modern cultural responses to disaster. And most notably, his book, Plague in the Early Modern World, a documentary history, was published just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, making him a timely and relevant voice during a global crisis. We are so grateful that you joined us tonight, Dr. Bell, especially knowing that your family has been touched by the events in Israel, with 3 adult children living there, and your youngest recently having been called up to duty. And our hearts are with you and your family during this incredibly challenging time. So thank you, Professor, for being here and for enriching our understanding of resilience, something that feels more urgent and necessary than ever in these harrowing times. And we eagerly look forward to your wisdom and insights. If you please join us up on the bima.
It's really wonderful to be here. I don't know that I've ever felt as welcoming of a community, and to see so many familiar faces from my own Spertus community here in Milwaukee is strengthening and supportive. And while this has been a remarkably difficult week for so many people, it's also important to gather together and to reflect. I will share that there are days when I don't feel all that resilient, and so hopefully in talking through some aspects of resilience, I can gain a little bit more of it with you as well. But I do want to thank the Gill family for this lecture series and the Dubners. I didn't realize I was becoming part of the family, but I'm delighted to have a new family to be a part of as well. And so thank you, Rabbi Chertkov, also for a kind invitation, which I think has now spanned maybe a year and a half, but it's been ongoing for a while. There's always been something that has gotten in the way. I suppose that's why resilience is not a bad topic for us to discuss. I like to provide a little bit of context, and I would say that I'm not sure I ever thought about resilience particularly until one day when I happened to be in an elevator. Now, there is a New York story about that with the elevator crashing down from the 32nd floor while I was in it. It thankfully didn't go all the way to the bottom. But I happened to be in an elevator at Spertus, and at the time we rented out space to a Universalist Unitarian seminary, Meadville Lombard, and I ran into the provost there. And in the elevator speech, literally, we spoke for a few minutes, and I mentioned that I was working on Jewish environmental history. And she said, you know, you have to meet my colleague, Mike Hogue, who's working on environmental theology. And of course, my first response was, I don't believe in theology, but that's a nice thing. I suppose I could talk to him and humor you. I'm a historian, I don't believe in other things. But as it turns out, Mike and I became fast friends. We had coffee, I think, way too often. And while we didn't exactly see the world the same way, it was an opportunity to think differently. Mike and I were both exploring different aspects of ecology and environmental studies, and we had lots of fierce conversations, I suppose we can call them now. We were both also University of Chicago graduates, so we shared something in common about fun dying while we were undergraduates at the university studying. And after many years, actually 6 years we worked on this project, it actually became relevant as COVID was setting in, and all of a sudden, everywhere I turned, resilience was the language of the day. We never intended it really to be that. In fact, we had taught lots of courses on resilient leadership and thinking about how resilience and religion might have something to share with each other. Much of the resilience conversation was really about ecology and environmental systems. Sometimes it bled over into behavioral sciences and material sciences as well. And so we had lots of interesting conversations, but eventually tried to bring it together. And I suppose I begin with that as context to suggest that resilience is often found within, but it's often also in conversation with others. And I don't know that I would have come to the conversation of resilience, or at least to the concepts of it, without engaging with my dear colleague and friend, Mike Hogue. I suppose I should also, for those of you who know Spertus, know our incredible dean, Dr. Karen Freeman. I suppose I also am indebted to her because she made me realize that although Mike and I are really deep academics and don't always think about talking to real people, that we have to do that if we want to reach out to others. And so she, I think on the eve of publication of our book, made us rewrite the whole thing in the final week. It wasn't that pleasant, but it actually was very helpful at the end of the day. Much of resilience is really coming out of discussions about crisis, and so I've provided a source sheet that goes through a number of different texts, because that's what I like to do, is study texts. Some of them are Jewish texts, some of them are not, but I think they raise a number of interesting questions, and I'd like to explore them with you. Resilience became particularly important in the midst of crisis, and much of my work had been about natural disasters and crises in different settings, and so I was always taken by the notion that in Greek, the term crisis has a different kind of meaning than we tend to think about it today. Crisis, in the way that we think about it, is always a very bad thing, and we have to respond to it, and we have to find a way to be strong in the midst of it. But actually, in its original Greek sense, crisis has a kind of diagnostic and predictive meaning, and I cite here Reinhard Koselleck, one of the great German historians of contemporary work, who says that because of its diagnostic and predictive meaning, building on its Greek meaning, the term crisis became the indicator of new awareness. And that really struck me in some interesting ways, that crisis is actually in Greek a decision point. It's an opportunity to go in one of multiple directions at a particular time, and it requires us to develop a new awareness. We like to say in Chicago, I think it was our mayor who was alleged to say, never let a good crisis go to waste, but I think it was Machiavelli who might have said it before him. But it is an opportunity to think a little bit differently. And as you'll see, I'm going to suggest that we never return to where we were before in a crisis. And so a notion of a new awareness of thinking differently is essential to trying to struggle with crises, whatever the crisis might be. And so before I jump in a little bit further, I simply want to say that I know these are trying times for everyone, my family included. And I know I share with you prayer for the safety of everyone in Israel and real peace in the region so that innocent people are not harmed moving forward. And so we'll dedicate this resilience to that goal and to that hope. As I think about resilience, though, and as I think about crisis and change, I'm also struck by the notion that there's always something that exists from the previous time, from before the crisis, that continues through the crisis and still emerges afterwards. Some of you might be familiar with this phenomenon. I can recall speaking to many people during COVID who said, once this is over, I'm changing my ways. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to think differently. I'm going to behave differently. And the moment I don't know that the crisis is over, but the moment that it was perceived, I suppose socially decided that it was over, most people went back to their old habits and their way of doing things. Every once in a while, something stuck, and people began to do something a little bit differently. But many times, they yearn to get back to the way that they did things before. That, after all, is a bit of our human nature, right? We're comfortable with the way we do things. It's hard to change. And sometimes we need to be jolted out of that by some sort of crisis or a different way of thinking. And so I included a second quote here from Thomas Kuhn, who was one of the most famous authors, a scholar about the scientific revolution, who noted that new paradigms are born from old ones. They ordinarily incorporate much of the vocabulary and apparatus, both conceptual and manipulative, that the traditional paradigm had previously employed. And if you're interested about tradition tomorrow, I'm going to debunk that with lunch. But they seldom employ these borrowed elements in quite the traditional way. Within the new paradigm, old terms, concepts, and experiments fall into new relationships, one with the other. So although we might have similar experiences, and the words we use sometimes are even the same, they are endowed with different meanings, and they have a different context that we need to understand. So as Mike and I explored the notion of resilience, I think we found the traditional metaphor. Everybody's familiar with resilience, the rubber band, right? You pull the rubber band and it goes back, and then we're exactly where we were before. That's resilience. And in fact, in material culture, we often talk about the level of resilience as the amount that you can go back to the previous state that you had before. Or think about that slinky that goes down the steps, right? It always sort of reforms itself as it's moving down at the end. But what we noticed in looking at this was the rubber band is never exactly where it was before, and frankly, the more you pull it, eventually it will snap. And the slinky gets extended out. That's why it doesn't go down the steps anymore after the kids play with it for about 20 years or so. And so we began to sort of play with two concepts. Our notion that there is something out there called simple resilience, and that is our quest to return to the status quo, to what we had before. But the truth of the matter is, and I'll let you in on a little secret, is that nothing ever stays exactly the same. Everything is in a constant state of flux. And although we might think we've gone back to what we had before, we're not really back there. There's been some sort of alteration, some sort of transformation. And so Mike and I developed a concept we called complex resilience. And that is, as I've defined it here in number 3, the ability to learn and grow through disturbances, disruptions, and uncertainty. It's not always very easy. By the way, it's not always very pleasant. And we're not always very successful at it. But if we are truly complexly resilient, it means we we reflect on the difficulties that we're facing, and we try to change. We try to learn new things. We try to adapt in different kinds of ways. And those are truly resilient adaptive systems in ecology and environmental studies as well. It's a funny thing, I don't watch television, thankfully, except for Hogan's Heroes. That's the thing that I used to watch growing up, and so it might be the only show that I continue to watch, unless the Pittsburgh Steelers are playing. That's a different thing. Although I know that if I watch them, they're going to lose, and so I usually don't watch them anyway. But I happened to get a phone call years ago from our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Byron Sherwin. And Byron and I didn't always get along so well. We sort of talked, but we had different approaches to life and to scholarship and to administration. But he called me up and he said, I'm watching one of these talk shows. And I was thinking, well, why would you be watching a talk show? And he said, somebody just came on and they're talking about resilience, so I thought of you and I wanted to share it. And the book that was being talked about was written by Judith Rodin. She's a really fascinating person, was the head of the Rockefeller Foundation for many years, was the first woman appointed as the president of an Ivy League college. She was the president of the University of Pennsylvania. And I've had a number of conversations with her over the years, really an interesting, thoughtful person. And she wrote a book called The Resilience Dividend. And I confess, the first time I read it, it's a lot about economics and third world countries and the stuff that the Rockefeller Foundation deeply cares about. But as I've reread it over the years, there are a number of things in there that really resonate with me. And I pulled out one quote that I wanted to share with you because I think it gets at this differentiation between simple resilience and complex resilience. Judith writes, and this is quote number 4, resilience is the capacity of any entity, an individual, a community, an organization, or a natural system. And notice the layers here. It's about individuals through systems, to prepare for disruptions, to recover from shocks and stresses, and adapt and grow from a disruptive experience. And so she covers all aspects of resilience from the sort of simplistic notion to a very complex one. But this is where it gets interesting. As you build resilience, therefore, you become more able to prevent or mitigate stresses and shocks you can identify, and better able to respond to those you can't predict or avoid. Well, how powerful is that, given all of the things that we can't predict today and the radical changes that happen in our lives? You also develop greater capacity to bounce back from a crisis, or as I like to say, bounce forward, learn from it, and achieve revitalization. An interesting mix here, right? We're bouncing back, but we're also being revitalized in the process. That's the true task of resilience, is to be able to allow us to not only to grow from what we've learned, but to try something new, to transfer it into new aspects of our life. Ideally, as you become more adept, she writes, at managing disruption and skilled at resilience building, you are able to create and take advantage of new opportunities in both good times and bad. And what a powerful notion that is, that we can actually take the skills that we learn, and even though we don't know what we're going to face, and we really don't know what tools that we need, we have an opportunity to think about it differently as a result of the experiences that we've had. So I sometimes hearken back to two different approaches. One is about opening ourselves up to being reflective and changeable, which is very hard. I know myself to be a pretty strict and narrow person. I don't know. I'm, in German, we say pünktlich. I'm very pünktlich. I'm timely. I'm sort of organized. I know exactly what I'm going to do. But actually opening ourselves up to be more flexible and thoughtful and challenging of ourselves is something that's really quite important. For those of you who might have read Peter Coleman's book on polarization, Coleman is a political scientist at Columbia, he makes the argument that the problem with polarization that we have today is because we're looking for simplistic answers. Everything then becomes black and white, and so there's no nuance, and we become polarized in our particular views. But actually what we need to become unpolarized is complexity and nuance. Ability to ask about our own perceptions and those of others, and the assumptions that we make and the assumptions that others make. There's just wonderful things to think about as you begin to open yourself. And so I want to share a quote from Aaron Gilson, who is a professor of feminist studies, but also of ethics, in one of those really thin little books that cost a fortune, but is really worth buying. I think it's 100 pages and it's $100. $1 a page doesn't seem like a bad rate for wisdom of this sort. She writes, "By opening oneself up to others and their effects on the self, one is also open to transformation in relation to these others. Receptivity, non-closure, and self-dispossession endow one with the gift of changeability. Openness to experiencing alterity, otherness, and altering in relation to it is the condition of invention. Mobility and inclusiveness makes one stronger and yet more fragile at the same time." Right? As we come to terms with our vulnerabilities, we actually begin to develop a sense of openness to change, but also to understand others. And that is the beginning of resilience, but also the beginning of tolerance for others and other positions as well. We may not agree with them, but when we can understand the assumptions and the approaches, we actually have a very different opportunity for being in relationship to them. Notions of adaptability, I think, come out very much in ecological studies. And I've given you a quote here that I won't read, but from the Post-Carbon Institute, because many of the ways that we think about the changes in our natural systems can, in fact, very productively be applied to ourselves, to the work that we do and the ways that we think about ourselves at the same time. But I want to share now a little bit of some of my thinking about resilience, and then particularly move into a few Jewish texts, and then try to give you a framework or a model to think about how to cultivate this sense of complex resilience. It's a funny thing, but as I studied resilience in a lot of different areas, and I never read so many scientific journals except for those 3 years when we were working on this project, I actually found resonance in a few things that struck me as very core to our Jewish experiences. And I've listed the 3 here under note number 7. One of them is this sense of religion and spirituality. Oftentimes we turn to our faith as a way of creating coherence or sense-making, particularly during difficult situations or during periods of crisis. The second thing that I learned as I read about resilience is that resilience is enhanced when we have kind of social redundancies and social networks. And so as it turns out, community is a real source of resilience, the kind of community that you crafted here and in many other parts of your life. And finally, the notion of memory, which doesn't seem like it would be a good source of resilience, but it is, because sometimes we can hearken back to experiences that we've had and try to apply them to situations that we're facing now to help us resolve them for the future. There are a number of characteristics of resilience. I've listed some of the ones that are sort of most common, and sometimes they surprise me. Resilience is ubiquitous. There are aspects of resilience, there's examples of it in almost everything that we do, in everything that we see in the world, if we would only stop and look at it. Sometimes it's very easy to pass by those things and just either assume that they function on their own or that they're stagnant. But in fact, this idea of changeability, of resilience, is everywhere we look. Resilience, unfortunately, is amoral, and we've learned a little bit of that over this past week, that some of the most evil things are in fact highly resilient, and they can survive in many different kinds of ways. I prefer a sort of more simplistic example, which is my wife's garden. She likes gardening. I hate it. I think opposites attract in this case, so I think it's a good thing that she likes to garden, but you couldn't catch me in the garden for anything. But I hear her talking all the time about the weeds in the back and certain kinds of grasses. They're highly resilient. They come back regardless of whether she weeds them, how much stuff she does. So resilience in itself may not be a good thing. It could be amoral. It can be evil sometimes. The most resilient things are some of the evilest at times. And so how do we think about making sure that the resilience that we cultivate is for the good? It allows us to advance and to move forward. Resilience takes on lots of different contexts and characteristics. It's rather common, and it exists at many different levels, as Judith Rodin pointed out. It's about social competence and problem-solving skills. And I think the most resilient people and the most resilient systems I know of are the ones that can grapple with the most sophisticated and difficult problems. You might have heard of the term wicked problems. Those are the ones that the more you try to unwrap, the more complicated and the more difficult they become. Resilience helps us to address those kinds of challenges. We can't always solve them. And I would quote from my favorite poet, Peter Cole, who is a Jewish poet of contemporary sort of experience, but also translates a lot of medieval poetry. He has a wonderful poem called The Perfect State. And you should read it sometimes. It's really a remarkable poem. But essentially the message of Peter Cole's poem is that there is no such thing as a perfect state. Trying to get to perfection is the perfect state. Understanding our imperfection and trying to improve ourselves is really what it's all about. I would argue that is sort of resilience in a nutshell. I want to share 2 of the 3 texts that I've shared with you on this sheet because I think they highlight some of the important issues of the topic. Oh, okay, I will read it out loud. It's what always happens, it's censored, I suppose. It's a Talmudic citation. So this one comes from the tractate Tanit, which deals a lot with fasting, but also with natural disasters, which is why I was drawn to it in particular. It's number 10. If you would have the sheet, you would see that it's number 10. And it goes something like this. Achia Hashaloni cursed them as a reed. So, right, he's cursing them as a reed. This is one of those prophets who's upbraiding the Jewish people, the Israelites, for their poor behavior. He curses them as a reed. What is a reed? That which stands in a place of water, with shoots that renew themselves and many roots. Even if all the winds in the world come and blow against it, it will move back and forth with them. When the wind falls silent, the reed will stand in its place. But the wicked Balaam blessed them as a cedar. Remember, he wanted to say all sorts of bad things, but God sort of kept changing it into positive things. So he's blessing them as a cedar. As it is said, like cedars beside the waters. What is a cedar, the Talmud asks? That which does not stand in a place of water, without shoots that renew themselves, and without many roots. So the opposite of our reed. When the winds come and blow against it, it does not move back and forth with them. So when a strong south wind blows against it, it is uprooted and upended. And I've lived through the 1989 earthquake in Berkeley. I can tell you that the house that I had moved back and forth. It wasn't quite like a cedar, so it didn't fall over exactly, but it sort of did tumble 1 or 2 stories. So we have a reed and we have a cedar. 2 very different kinds of items. A reed has a sort of system, a network. And so it can often survive in different conditions. And yet there is something fragile about it as well. It doesn't have deep roots. It has many roots, but it doesn't have deep roots. And on the other hand, we have a cedar, something that is very strong and very big, and actually is quite strong in many ways, except when it hits a particularly difficult patch where it can be uprooted and it can't survive. Both of these, I'd like to suggest, provide us with opportunities to think about the balance that we need in our lives. Sometimes it's about the connections we make. It's the network. It's the sort of dispersed way that we interact with others. And sometimes it's when we're called to be strong. And we need a little bit of both the cedar and the reeds. And so actually both are a blessing and a curse unless we take them together. An opportunity to be flexible and agile on the one hand, but strong and committed to the work that we do. One final sort of rabbinic saying, and it comes from, I suppose this one is also not in your handout, it comes from Avot de Rabbi Natan. It's a fairly famous passage, and I like to teach it sometimes too when I talk about the destruction of the temple. And it goes as follows. Once Rabban, or Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, left Jerusalem, and Rabbi Yehoshua followed after him, and he saw the holy temple destroyed. And sometimes I think about the vivid images that we see on social media today about the destruction. Rabbi Yehoshua said, "Woe to us, for this is destroyed, the place where all of Israel's sins are forgiven, for all the sacrifices that we can take to the temple." Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "My son, do not be distressed, for we have a form of atonement just like it. And what is it? Acts of kindness. As it says, for I desire kindness, not a well-being offering. Sometimes resilience is about understanding the ways that we can respond and the fact that they might be different in different contexts. So from moving to giving sacrifices to actually focusing on how we treat others was a remarkable change in the rabbinic period, but one that suggests that adaptability and flexibility and changing our perspective is just as important as anything else. I will share, I used to go every morning to a minyan in Oakland where we lived. There was an older gentleman in the front who was said to have studied with Rav Kook, and someone said to me, you should go talk to him and get a blessing, and by the way, maybe he'll pay for your college tuition too. I said, well, that's not really what I'm after, but I went and I spoke to him, and he looked at me and he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a historian, I study history. And he said, well, I'll teach you all the history you need to know. First, there was human sacrifice. Then there was animal sacrifice. Now we have prayer, but soon there'll be telepathy. And I tell you that at the time I sort of thought, well, that's kind of a strange thing. But I think what he meant by telepathy was the sense that we can connect with each other and understand each other at a much deeper level. Not that we will necessarily be able to do that without speaking, but I think in some ways we can, and that's part of what we hope to achieve. So as I think about resilience, and as Mike and I thought a bit about it, and this is where Karen came back into context, we noticed that there were several key components in everything that we studied about resilience, and we boiled them down to 4 components. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were able to create a nice acronym out of it. It's a Latin acronym, and the acronym is VITA, which means life, and our sense that being complexly resilient is a life stance. And there's 4 components to it. The first is vulnerability. The only way you can be truly resilient is if you're open to change and you're open to examining your own perspectives and your own way of doing things. If you're not willing to do that, you'll never be resilient. But it also means that you're vulnerable to how others think, not necessarily to change your own opinions, but to understand their perspectives and their approaches. The second component is intentionality. If we're not intentional about any of the work we do, it hardly matters at the end of the day because we won't be able to replicate it. We can't continue to do it in different contexts. Intentionality is a core component, kavanah, as we said earlier, that allows us to be focused in a very direct kind of way. Third component is trust. If we don't develop networks of trust, of community, of colleagues, and I like to say across difference, one of the things I love about my institution is that we have 3 core values. One is on academic excellence, the second is on community building, but the third is around convening across difference. It's bringing people together who see the world differently. And that's really the only way you can create a sense of trust and confidence in each other is by being open to difficult conversations and doing it in a genuine, vulnerable, and intentional way. The last part of it is awareness. That's the A in Vita. And if you're not aware of what's going on around you, then you can't be resilient. Resilience is about continually asking questions and seeing how things are changing in order to be able to adapt in different kinds of ways. Now, I had one funny experience around this recently. Chicago, we hosted the Parliament of World Religions. And as part of that, I invited the Elijah Project, which is a sort of interreligious leadership institute, to have their deliberations at our institution. And they were gracious enough to invite me to participate in them. So we had representatives from, I wouldn't say all the major religions, but most major religions, people from 5 different continents who came to visit with us. And I was having a lovely talk with Swamiji and thinking about sort of Hindu experiences. And I mentioned to him this notion of Vita, vulnerability, intentionality, trust, and awareness. And he said to me, well, if I were you, I would put awareness a little bit further up in this. And so I might say vulnerability, awareness, trust, and intentionality. And he said, and that, the acronym for that is Vati. And I started to think, well, it's sort of curious. I don't know what Vati means, but it must mean something. So the next day I called up Mike, my colleague, and I said, you're an expert on world religions. I think we're onto something here. It's not just Vita, it's also Vati. And I said, what does it mean? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. So he gets on Google and he looks it up. He says, it's a Sanskrit word. I said, I knew it. I knew it had some sort of Hindi kind of thing here. He says, this is amazing. I said, what does it mean? And he looks, it means aquatic bird. And so we decided that Vati probably was not what we were looking for, and I don't know that aquatic birds are necessarily that resilient, or more resilient than anything else. But it was an interesting opportunity to think across difference in this case. What I took away from that conversation was that he actually felt that these were the 4 crucial categories, no matter how we thought about them. And it's important to think about how they intersect with each other. To be vulnerable, you have to be intentional, and you have to be able to have trust, and you have to be aware of what's around you. And so I would say that being resilient begins with this sense of vulnerability. It's hard for us to hear because all we want to do is be invulnerable, right? We tend to think that's how we're strong, as if we can sort of somehow separate ourselves from everything going on around us, and we can be oblivious to it, and somehow it can't affect us. But actually, complex resilience means that we have to be open to those things. No matter how difficult and challenging they are, this week has been a particularly difficult and challenging one for so many people, and for myself included, as I talk to my daughter on the front lines and think about how she's doing. The vulnerability is difficult. Sometimes vulnerability can be traumatic. And yet, if we're not open to thinking about the ways in which we're vulnerable, I don't think we have that sense of humanity anymore. And I know we're all grappling with what it means to be human in these days. Vulnerability is a part of that, and asking ourselves how we're vulnerable in what ways and how others might be as well is an important step towards being resilient. That's what I wanted to share with you this evening. I think there's different ways of thinking about how we respond to crisis, to come back to where we began, but for me it's about vita, it's about life. Life is about responding to crisis, and it's thinking about how we can be resilient and agile and flexible, but learn along the way. Not change simply for change's sake, but change rooted in thoughtfulness and reflection and allowing us to grow in ways that we might not have imagined before. I don't know what the protocol is here, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments, or as I like to say when I'm teaching for those of you with whom I've studied, questions, comments, or regrets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bell, and I know that you're available for questions in the ONEG afterwards, and so let us conclude by rising together as a community and as a congregation. And there's something beautiful about the organic nature of life, and there's actually a story about after Hurricane Katrina, they noticed that almost all of them had been knocked down in the area, except for one avenue that had these particularly glorious trees. And when they tried to find out what it was that kept those trees standing, it was that the roots had grown intertwined underneath the surface. And I think that is a good metaphor for us and for our community and our world right now, is that we need each other in order to stay standing. And so let us say these words of our tradition, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Erev Tov, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.